They thought I was blind, watched them steal my billions, then struck back. Imagine lying in your own bed, completely blind, helpless, while your husband makes love to another woman just feet away from you. You hear every sound, every whisper, every moan, but you can't see anything. You're trapped in darkness. Now imagine this. What if you could actually see everything? Every kiss, every betrayal, every lie, but you say nothing, you pretend, you wait, because you're planning something they will never see coming. This is the true story of Eleanor Montgomery, a woman who lost her sight, her trust, and almost her life. But what her husband didn't know was that she was watching, and she remembered everything. Eleanor Montgomery was worth $4.7 billion when she met the man who would try to destroy her. Her story isn't just about betrayal. It's about the most calculated revenge in modern American history. A revenge so perfectly executed that it destroyed 2 lives, exposed a criminal conspiracy, and changed corporate law forever. But to understand how a blind woman brought down an empire of lies, you need to understand where it all began. You need to understand the 3 questions that haunted everyone who followed this case. First, how do you steal billions of dollars from someone without them knowing? Second, what happens when the victim isn't really a victim at all? And third, can you ever truly trust the person sleeping next to you every night? The answers will leave you questioning everything you think you know about trust, love, and human nature. Because Eleanor Montgomery didn't just survive what happened to her. She weaponized it. She turned her greatest weakness into her most devastating strength. And by the time her husband realized what was happening, it was already too late. This is a story about blindness, but not the kind you think. It's about the blindness of greed, the blindness of arrogance, the blindness of underestimating the woman who built an empire. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Eleanor Montgomery wasn't born into wealth. She was born into legacy. Her father, Richard Montgomery, started with nothing in 1973. He was a computer programmer working out of his garage in Palo Alto, California, during the earliest days of Silicon Valley. While other men his age were chasing corporate jobs and steady paychecks, Richard was building something different. He saw the future of technology before anyone else did. He understood that computers would change everything about how we live, work, and communicate, and he bet everything on that vision. Montgomery Technologies started as a software company, small contracts, government work, nothing glamorous. But Richard had something most entrepreneurs don't have. He had patience. He understood that building something meaningful takes time. So while his competitors were burning through venture capital and chasing quick exits, Richard was building infrastructure. He was creating systems. He was laying the foundation for what would become one of the most valuable technology companies in the world. By 1985, Montgomery Technologies had its first major breakthrough. They developed an operating system for enterprise networks that revolutionized how large corporations managed their data. The Pentagon became their first major client. Then came IBM. Then Microsoft wanted to partner. The deals kept coming. The money kept flowing. And Richard Montgomery went from garage programmer to tech visionary almost overnight. But here's what made Richard different from most billionaires. He never forgot where he came from. He never let the money change who he was fundamentally. He still drove a Toyota. He still lived in the same modest house in Palo Alto. He still answered his own emails. And most importantly, he was preparing his daughter to carry on his legacy. Eleanor was born in 1987, right as Montgomery Technologies was beginning its explosive growth. She grew up in boardrooms. She attended shareholder meetings before she could spell the word shareholder. Richard brought her everywhere, not because he was showing off his daughter, but because he was teaching her. He was showing her how to read people, how to spot a good deal from a bad one, how to lead with integrity in an industry that often rewards ruthlessness. Eleanor wasn't like other children of billionaires. She didn't have a trust fund childhood filled with private jets and luxury vacations. Richard made sure of that. She went to public school until 8th grade. She had a part-time job at 16 working at a local bookstore. She learned the value of $1 not because her father was cheap, but because he wanted her to understand that money is a tool, not an identity. When it came time for college, Eleanor could have gone anywhere. Harvard was offering admission. Stanford was practically begging. But Eleanor chose MIT. She wanted to understand the technology that built her father's empire. She wanted to earn her place in the company, not inherit it by default. So she studied computer science and business administration. She graduated summa cum laude at 21. She went straight into an MBA program at Harvard, focusing on corporate strategy and technology management. And when she graduated at 23, she didn't go straight to Montgomery Technologies. She worked at McKinsey for 2 years. She wanted to understand how other companies operated. She wanted to see the industry from the outside before she stepped into her inheritance. When Eleanor finally joined Montgomery Technologies at 25, she started at the bottom. Her father insisted on it. She worked in customer service for 6 months, then sales, then product development. She learned every aspect of the business from the ground up, and the employees respected her for it. They saw that she wasn't just some rich kid playing executive. She was learning. She was listening. She was earning her place. By the time Eleanor was 28, she was heading the company's innovation division. She led the development of a cloud-based security platform that would eventually generate $3 billion in annual revenue. She proved herself not just as Richard's daughter, but as a visionary leader in her own right. And then, on a cold November morning in 2016, Richard Montgomery died of a massive heart attack at his desk. He was 69 years old. He died doing what he loved, building the company he'd spent 43 years creating. The funeral was massive. Tech industry leaders flew in from around the world. The governor of California gave a eulogy. President Obama sent a letter of condolence. But through it all, Eleanor stood silent and composed. She didn't cry publicly. She didn't break down. She simply stood there accepting condolences, knowing that everything was about to change. Because Richard's will was very specific. He left everything to Eleanor, not just his shares in Montgomery Technologies, everything. The houses, the investments, the intellectual property rights, the entire $4.7 billion estate went to his only child. At 29 years old, Eleanor Montgomery became one of the youngest female billionaires in American history, and she became the sole owner and CEO of Montgomery Technologies. The board of directors confirmed her appointment unanimously. Wall Street analysts praised the decision. Industry publications ran features about the next generation of tech leadership. Eleanor Montgomery was being positioned as the heir to her father's vision, the woman who would carry Montgomery Technologies into the future. But here's what nobody saw coming. Here's the detail that would eventually destroy everything. Eleanor Montgomery had a weakness, a blind spot that had nothing to do with her business acumen or her intelligence. Eleanor believed in love. She believed that finding someone to share her life with was just as important as building a successful company. And that belief, that very human desire for connection and partnership, would nearly cost her everything. Because 6 months after her father died, Eleanor met someone. She met him at a charity gala in Manhattan, one of those black tie events where Manhattan's elite gather to write checks and network. Eleanor usually avoided these events. She found them superficial and tedious, but her head of public relations convinced her that Montgomery Technologies needed the visibility, especially with Eleanor as the new face of the company. So she went. She wore a black Valentino gown. She smiled for the cameras. She made small talk with donors and board members from other companies. And then, at the champagne reception, she met Daniel Bradford. Daniel Bradford was everything Eleanor didn't know she was looking for. He was handsome in that effortless way that doesn't seem calculated. 6'2", athletic build, dark hair with just enough gray at the temples to suggest wisdom and experience. He had an easy smile and eyes that seemed genuinely interested when you spoke. He wasn't part of the tech world, which Eleanor found refreshing. He was a corporate attorney specializing in mergers and acquisitions, Harvard Law School graduate, partner at a prestigious Manhattan firm. He came from what people call good breeding. His father was a federal judge. His mother was a philanthropist who sat on the boards of several major museums. Daniel had the kind of pedigree that opened doors in certain circles, but when he approached Eleanor at that gala, he didn't lead with any of that. He didn't name-drop or peacock. He simply introduced himself and asked her opinion on a legal case that was making headlines. They talked for 20 minutes, then an hour. Then they lost track of time completely. Eleanor found herself laughing genuinely for the first time since her father died. Daniel was intelligent without being condescending. He was charming without being sleazy. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. And when the event ended, he asked for her number, not in a presumptuous way, just a simple question. Would you like to have dinner sometime? Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village. No paparazzi, no publicity, just two people getting to know each other. Daniel asked about her work but didn't dominate the conversation with shop talk. He wanted to know about her interests outside of business. What did she read? What kind of music did she listen to? What did she do when she wasn't running a billion-dollar company? Eleanor opened up in ways she rarely did. She told him about the pressure of living up to her father's legacy. She admitted that sometimes she felt alone at the top, surrounded by employees and board members but lacking genuine connection. She confessed that she sometimes wondered if people saw her as Eleanor or just as Montgomery Technologies. And Daniel listened. He didn't offer empty platitudes or try to solve her problems. He just listened. And for Eleanor, that was everything. The relationship moved quickly. Within 3 months, they were inseparable. Daniel would fly to California every weekend to see her. Eleanor would take the company jet to New York to surprise him. They took a vacation to the Amalfi Coast. They spent Christmas together in Aspen. And after 6 months of dating, Daniel proposed. It was Valentine's Day, 2017. Daniel planned an elaborate proposal at the restaurant where they had their first date. He rented out the entire place. He had a string quartet playing. He got down on one knee and presented a 4-carat diamond ring from Cartier. And he said the words that Eleanor had been hopping to hear. He told her that she was the most extraordinary person he'd ever met. That he wanted to spend the rest of his life supporting her dreams and building a future together. That he loved her not for her money or her name, but for who she was as a person. Eleanor said yes without hesitation. She said yes because she believed him. She said yes because after a lifetime of being Eleanor Montgomery, the heiress, the CEO, the woman who had to be strong and composed and perfect, she had finally found someone who made her feel like she could just be Eleanor. The person, the woman. The partner, they were married 4 months later in the Hamptons. It was a small ceremony by Billionaire standards. Only 150 guests, close friends and family. The wedding cost $8 million, which included flying in orchids from Thailand and hiring a celebrity chef to prepare the reception dinner. Eleanor wore a custom Vera Wang gown. Daniel wore Tom Ford. They exchanged vows on the beach at sunset. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Eleanor believed she had found her happily ever after. After the honeymoon in Bora Bora, the couple settled into their new life together. Eleanor offered Daniel the chance to continue his law career, but Daniel suggested something different. He said he wanted to be more involved in Eleanor's world. He wanted to understand the business that meant so much to her. He wanted to contribute to Montgomery Technologies in a meaningful way. Eleanor was touched by his interest. Most of the men she'd dated before had been intimidated by her success or resentful of her wealth. But Daniel seemed genuinely excited to be part of her world. So Eleanor created a position for him, Vice President of Strategic Operations. It was a senior role that gave Daniel oversight of several key divisions including legal affairs, corporate development, and strategic partnerships. The board raised some eyebrows. Hearing your husband to a C-suite position wasn't exactly best practice in corporate governance, but Eleanor was the majority shareholder. She had final say, and she trusted Daniel completely. She gave him signature authority on certain company accounts. She included him in board meetings. She consulted him on major decisions. She was building a partnership, both in marriage and in business. And for the first year, everything seemed perfect. Montgomery Technologies continued to grow under Eleanor's leadership. The company's market cap reached $85 billion. They acquired 3 smaller tech companies to expand their cloud services division. Revenue hit $18 billion annually. Eleanor was featured on the cover of Fortune magazine as one of the most powerful women in technology. And through it all, Daniel was by her side. He played the role of supportive husband perfectly. He attended industry events with her. He charmed investors and board members. He offered strategic advice that seemed sound and thoughtful. From the outside, they looked like the power couple of Silicon Valley. Young, attractive, successful, and deeply in love. But what Eleanor didn't see, what she couldn't see because she was too close and too trusting, was what was happening behind the carefully constructed facade. What Eleanor didn't know was that Daniel Bradford had been planning something from the very beginning. From the moment he approached her at that charity gala, from the first date, from the proposal, from the wedding vows, because Daniel Bradford wasn't who he claimed to be. His law career was real, his pedigree was real, but his intentions were not. Daniel had been watching Eleanor for months before they met. He'd researched her, studied her, learned her patterns and her vulnerabilities. He knew that she was lonely at the top. He knew that she craved genuine connection. He knew exactly what to say and how to say it to make her fall in love with him. And he'd done it all with one goal in mind: to get access to the Montgomery fortune. To position himself inside the company, to set himself up for the greatest theft in corporate history. But Daniel wasn't working alone. He had a partner, someone who would help him execute every step of the plan, someone who was already inside Montgomery Technologies before Daniel ever said "I do." Her name was Sophia Chen, and she was about to become the most important person in Daniel's life, just not in the way Eleanor could have ever imagined. Sophia Chen was 26 years old when she was hired as Daniel Bradford's executive assistant at Montgomery Technologies. On paper, she was perfect for the job, Stanford graduate with a degree in business administration, 3 years of experience at a top firm, impeccable references, fluent in Mandarin and Spanish. She interviewed beautifully, professional, articulate, eager to learn. The Human Resources Department approved her hearing without hesitation. What they didn't know was that Daniel had found Sophia long before the job posting ever went up. He'd recruited her specifically for this role, because Sophia Chen wasn't just an assistant. She was Daniel's girlfriend. They'd been together for 2 years before Daniel ever met Eleanor. They'd met at a bar in Manhattan, both ambitious, both beautiful, both desperately wanting more than what their current lives offered. And when Daniel started researching Eleanor Montgomery as a potential target, he brought Sophia into the plan. He told her exactly what he was going to do. He was going to seduce one of the richest women in America. He was going to marry her. He was going to get inside her company. And then he was going to take everything. Most women would have walked away. Most women would have been horrified by the cold calculation of it all. But Sophia wasn't most women. She looked at Daniel's plan and saw opportunity. She saw a chance to never worry about money again. She saw a way out of the middle-class existence she'd grown up in. So instead of walking away, she signed on. She agreed to play the role of the perfect assistant, the loyal employee, the woman who would help Daniel steal billions while hiding in plain sight. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Daniel would marry Eleanor and gain access to the company. Sophia would get hired as his assistant, giving them a legitimate reason to spend time together. They would slowly begin embezzling money from Montgomery Technologies through a series of shell companies and offshore accounts. Small amounts at first. 50,000 here, 100,000 there. Nothing that would raise immediate red flags in a company with $18 billion in annual revenue. They would build up an offshore nest egg over 2 years. And then, when the time was right, they would execute the final phase. The phase that would give them everything. But here's what made their plan truly evil. They weren't just going to steal Eleanor's money. They were going to destroy her completely. They were going to make sure she could never come after them, never prosecute them, never recover what they'd taken. And to do that, Daniel had come up with something that still makes people shudder when they hear about it. He was going to arrange an accident. An accident that would either kill Eleanor or leave her so damaged, so incapacitated that she'd be completely helpless. And once Eleanor was out of the way, Daniel would step in as her husband and proxy. He would take control of Montgomery Technologies. He would have power of attorney over her assets. And with Sophia's help, he would drain every account, liquidate every asset, and disappear before anyone realized what had happened. It was a plan that required patience, calculation, and an absolute absence of conscience. And for 2 years, Daniel and Sophia executed it perfectly. The embezzlement started small, just as they'd planned. Daniel had signature authority on several company accounts as vice president of strategic operations. He created a series of consulting contracts with fake companies that existed only on paper. Montgomery Technologies would pay these companies for strategic advisory services. The money would flow to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Then it would be moved again to Switzerland. Then to Luxembourg. Each transfer made it harder to trace. Each layer of complexity made it less likely that anyone would notice. Sophia managed the paperwork. She created the invoices. She forged the approval documents. She made sure everything looked legitimate on the surface. And because she was Daniel's assistant, nobody questioned why she was handling these transactions. It was her job to manage his administrative work. Over 24 months, Daniel and Sophia embezzled $847 million from Montgomery Technologies. Nearly $1 billion, stolen in increments small enough that they never triggered the company's fraud detection systems. They were careful, they were patient, and they were getting away with it. But the money was only part of the plan. The real goal was complete control, and for that, Daniel needed Eleanor out of the way. So in the fall of 2019, he started planning the accident. Eleanor had a routine that she'd maintained for years. Every Friday evening, she would drive herself to the couple's lake house in upstate New York. It was her time to decompress, to get away from the pressure of running a massive company, to spend the weekend in nature, reading and thinking and planning for the week ahead. Daniel never joined her on these trips. He claimed he had too much work to do, board meetings to prepare for, strategy sessions to attend. Eleanor didn't question it. She valued her alone time, and she appreciated that Daniel understood her need for space. But Daniel wasn't staying behind because of work. He was staying behind because he was planning to kill his wife. The route to the lake house was perfect for what he had in mind. Winding mountain roads, steep drop-offs, no guardrails in certain sections. If a car went off the road at the right spot, it would roll hundreds of feet down into a ravine. The driver would be lucky to survive. And if they did survive, the injuries would be catastrophic. Daniel spent weeks studying the route. He identified the exact curve where he wanted the accident to happen, a hairpin turn called Devil's Bend. Local legend said 3 people had died there over the years. The road was poorly maintained. The asphalt was cracked, and if you were going even slightly too fast, you'd never make the turn. Daniel's plan was to tamper with Eleanor's car. Specifically, he was going to cut her brake lines. Not completely. That would be too obvious. Just enough that they would fail under pressure. Just enough that when Eleanor tried to brake going into Devil's Bend, nothing would happen. The car would go straight off the road. It would roll down the embankment, and Eleanor would either die on impact or be so severely injured that she'd never be the same. Daniel would play the devastated husband. He would cry at her hospital bed. He would tell everyone how much he loved her. And then, as her spouse and designated power of attorney, he would take control of everything. He researched how to cut brake lines without leaving obvious evidence of tampering. He practiced on an old car he bought specifically for this purpose. He made sure he knew exactly how much to cut so that the brakes would function normally at first, then fail catastrophically when needed most. On Thursday, October 10th, 2019, Daniel executed his plan. Eleanor was at the office all day. Her Mercedes SUV was parked in the executive garage beneath Montgomery Technologies headquarters. Daniel had a key to the garage. He had access to Eleanor's parking spot. Nobody would question why he was there. At 2 a.m, when the building was empty except for a skeleton security crew, Daniel went down to the garage. He brought a small toolkit. He slid under Eleanor's SUV, and he carefully, methodically cut into the brake lines. Not all the way through, just deep enough that the fluid would leak slowly. Deep enough that by the time Eleanor was on those mountain roads the next evening, she'd have no braking power left. He finished the job in 12 minutes. He cleaned up any evidence. He went back upstairs to his office, and he waited. The next day, Friday, October 11th, Eleanor followed her normal routine. She left the office at 5 p.m. She kissed Daniel goodbye and told him she'd see him Sunday evening. She got in her Mercedes, completely unaware that she was driving a death trap. And Daniel watched her pull out of the garage, knowing that in a few hours, his wife would be dead. Eleanor drove north toward the lake house, listening to a podcast about leadership. She was thinking about a product launch scheduled for the following month. She was mentally reviewing talking points for an upcoming investor call. She was doing what she always did on these drives, using the time to clear her head and organize her thoughts. She didn't notice that her brake pedal felt slightly softer than usual. She didn't realize that brake fluid was slowly leaking onto the road behind her. She didn't know that with every mile, her ability to stop the car was diminishing. At 8:47 p.m., Eleanor's phone rang. It was Daniel. He asked if she'd made it to the lake house safely. She told him she was about 20 minutes away. He told her to drive carefully. He said, "I love you." She said, "I love you too." And Daniel hung up, knowing it might be the last conversation he ever had with his wife. 15 minutes later, Eleanor approached Devil's Bend. She was going 65 miles per hour, which was the speed limit. She'd driven this road hundreds of times. She knew exactly when to brake. She knew exactly how to navigate the sharp curve. She pressed her foot on the brake pedal. Nothing happened. The pedal went straight to the floor, no resistance, no stopping power. Eleanor felt the first spike of panic. She pumped the brakes frantically, still nothing. The curve was coming up fast. She tried to downshift, tried to use the engine to slow down, but she was going too fast. There wasn't enough time. Eleanor gripped the steering wheel and tried to make the turn anyway. The Mercedes drifted wide. The tires lost traction. And then the SUV left the road. It hit the embankment at the edge of the cliff. It went airborne, and then it started rolling. The vehicle tumbled end over end down the rocky slope. Glass shattered, metal crumpled. Eleanor was thrown around inside the cabin, her seatbelt the only thing keeping her from being ejected. The SUV rolled 4 complete times before slamming into a cluster of trees at the bottom of the ravine. The impact was devastating. The windshield exploded. The roof caved in. The driver's side door was crushed, and Eleanor, bleeding and broken, lost consciousness. The crash happened at 9:04 p.m. Nobody witnessed it. The road was isolated. No other cars were around. Eleanor's phone had been thrown from the vehicle during the crash. She couldn't call for help. She couldn't move. She could barely breathe. And as she lay there in the darkness, bleeding internally and drifting in and out of consciousness, Daniel Bradford was in Manhattan having dinner with Sophia Chen, celebrating what they believed was the successful execution of their plan. It took 3 hours for someone to find Eleanor. A local sheriff's deputy happened to be patrolling the area and noticed skid marks on the road. He stopped to investigate. He looked over the edge of the embankment and saw the wreckage below. He called it in immediately. Within 20 minutes, emergency responders were on scene. Fire department, paramedics, a helicopter medevac team. They rappelled down to the crash site and found Eleanor still barely alive, unconscious, broken ribs, punctured lung. Severe head trauma, massive internal bleeding. They stabilized her as much as they could and airlifted her to Albany Medical Center, the nearest trauma facility equipped to handle injuries this severe. The doctors gave her a 10% chance of survival. They rushed her into emergency surgery. They worked for 7 hours to repair the internal damage, stop the bleeding, stabilize her brain pressure, and somehow, impossibly, Eleanor survived. When the hospital called Daniel to inform him of the accident, he played his role perfectly. He sounded shocked, devastated, terrified. He demanded to know if his wife was going to be okay. He said he was getting on a plane immediately. He asked if there was anything he could do, and the hospital staff believed him completely. They heard a husband who was desperate to be by his wife's side. They had no idea they were listening to the man who had tried to murder her. Daniel arrived at the hospital 12 hours after the accident. He'd flown from New York to Albany on the company jet. He looked appropriately disheveled, worried, sleep-deprived. He demanded updates from the medical staff. He asked to see Eleanor immediately. And when they finally let him into her ICU room, he stood by her bedside and cried, real tears, because Daniel was a good actor. He knew how to sell the performance. He held Eleanor's hand. He whispered that he was sorry, that he loved her, that she had to fight. And the nurses watching thought they were witnessing devotion. They had no idea they were watching a murderer comforting his victim. Eleanor remained unconscious for 4 days. During that time, Daniel played the vigil. He stayed at the hospital. He slept in a chair next to her bed. He spoke to her doctors. He updated the board of directors at Montgomery Technologies. He fielded calls from concerned friends and business associates. He was the picture of a devoted husband facing his worst nightmare. And then on the 5th day, Eleanor woke up. Her eyes opened. She tried to speak but couldn't because of the breathing tube. The nurses called for the doctor immediately. They removed the tube carefully, and Eleanor's first words were asking for Daniel. He rushed to her side. He took her hand. He told her she was safe. She'd been in a terrible accident, but she'd survived. Everything was going to be okay. And then the doctor delivered the news that would change everything. The crash had caused severe trauma to Eleanor's optic nerves. The impact had created swelling and damage that couldn't be repaired. They'd done everything they could, but the prognosis was clear. Eleanor Montgomery would never see again. She was permanently blind. When the doctor said those words, Eleanor's world ended, not the physical world. She'd already lost that, but the world as she'd known it, her independence, her autonomy. Her ability to run her company, everything she'd built, everything she'd fought for, gone in an instant. She started crying, not loud sobs, just quiet tears running down her bruised face, and Daniel held her. He told her they would get through this together. He promised he would take care of everything. He said she wouldn't have to worry about the company or the business or anything. He would handle it all. And Eleanor, in her pain and fear and vulnerability, believed him. She trusted him completely. She thought her husband was going to be her savior. She had no idea he was the one who had destroyed her. The recovery process was brutal. Eleanor spent 3 weeks in the hospital. She had to learn how to navigate the world without sight. Physical therapists taught her how to move safely. Occupational therapists taught her how to complete basic tasks. The adjustment was overwhelming. Simple things that she'd done without thinking her entire life now required intense concentration and effort. Getting dressed, eating a meal, walking across a room. Everything was a challenge. Everything required help. And Daniel was always there, always offering assistance, always playing the supportive husband. But what Eleanor didn't know was that Daniel was already executing the next phase of his plan. While Eleanor was learning to live without sight, Daniel was taking control of Montgomery Technologies. He called an emergency board meeting. He presented medical documentation showing Eleanor's condition. He argued that she was in no position to continue as CEO. The trauma, the disability, the medications she was on for pain and depression. She needed time to heal. She needed to step back. And he, as her husband and as vice president of strategic operations, was prepared to step in as interim CEO. The board was reluctant. Eleanor was beloved within the company. She'd proven herself as a leader, but Daniel was persuasive. He showed them psychiatric evaluations that painted Eleanor as emotionally unstable. He had a doctor's letter recommending she take medical leave, and he had a document with what appeared to be Eleanor's signature, requesting that Daniel be appointed as her proxy. The signature was forged, of course. Sophia had practiced Eleanor's handwriting for months, but the board didn't know that. They saw what looked like a clear succession plan, and they voted to approve Daniel as interim CEO of Montgomery Technologies. Within 6 weeks of the accident, Daniel Bradford controlled everything. He had signature authority on all company accounts. He could approve acquisitions and strategic decisions. He could hire and fire executives. He could access Eleanor's personal finances under the guise of managing household expenses. And Eleanor, confined to their home in Palo Alto, recovering from her injuries, had no idea what was happening. She trusted Daniel to handle the business details. She was focused on learning to navigate her new reality. She was trying to accept that she would never see again, never read a document, never look at financial statements, never see the faces of her employees or the products her company created. She was grieving the loss of her sight and her independence. And while she grieved, Daniel and Sophia were celebrating because they'd pulled it off. The accident, the cover-up, the corporate takeover. Eleanor was blind and helpless. Daniel had complete control, and now came the easy part, draining every account and disappearing before anyone realized what had happened. But they made one critical mistake, one assumption that would ultimately destroy them. They assumed Eleanor would stay broken. They assumed she would remain helpless and dependent. They assumed that a blind woman posed no threat. They were wrong. Eleanor came home from the hospital on November 4th, 2019. Daniel had arranged for the house to be modified for her accessibility, handrails installed, furniture rearranged, everything she might trip over removed. He hired a full-time nurse to help with her care. He made sure Eleanor had everything she needed. And to anyone watching, he seemed like the perfect husband, attentive, patient, loving. But what happened behind closed doors was something completely different. Because once Eleanor was home, once the nurse went off duty in the evenings, Daniel stopped pretending. He stopped playing the devoted husband. And he started treating Eleanor exactly how he really felt about her, with contempt, with cruelty, with absolute disregard for her humanity. At first it was subtle, small comments, impatient sighs when Eleanor asked for help, a tone of voice that suggested he was annoyed by her presence. Eleanor noticed the change but attributed it to stress. Daniel was running the company now. He had enormous pressure on him. She told herself he was just tired, just overwhelmed. She made excuses for behavior that should have been a massive red flag. But then things escalated. One evening, about 2 weeks after Eleanor came home, she was sitting in the living room. She heard the front door open. She called out asking if it was Daniel. He said yes. Then she heard another voice, a woman's voice. Daniel introduced the woman as his new assistant, Sophia. He explained that they were working on a presentation for the board and needed to go over some documents. Eleanor thought nothing of it. She was actually grateful that Daniel had competent help. She told them to please continue their work. She wouldn't be in the way. And then something strange happened. Eleanor heard them go into Daniel's home office, but the door didn't close completely. And after about 10 minutes, she heard sounds that made no sense. Rustling, movement, and then a woman's soft moan. Eleanor's heart started racing. She told herself she was imagining things, that her other senses were playing tricks on her because she couldn't see. But then she heard it clearly. Daniel's voice saying Sophia's name, not in a professional context, in an intimate way, a romantic way. Eleanor sat frozen on the couch, unable to move, unable to process what she was hearing. And then she heard unmistakable sounds, the sounds of two people being intimate in her house, while she sat 20 feet away. Eleanor wanted to scream, to confront them, but something stopped her. Some instinct told her to stay quiet, to pretend she hadn't heard. So she sat there in silence, tears streaming down her face, listening to her husband betray her in the most explicit way possible. When Daniel and Sophia emerged from the office 30 minutes later, they were laughing about something. Eleanor heard them. She heard Sophia say goodbye, heard the front door close. And then Daniel came into the living room like nothing had happened. He asked Eleanor if she needed anything. She said no. He said he was going to take a shower, and Eleanor sat there alone, trying to understand what had just happened. Trying to reconcile the husband she thought she knew with the man she was beginning to suspect he actually was. That night was just the beginning. Over the next several weeks, Sophia became a regular presence in the house. Sometimes she and Daniel would work in his office. Sometimes they'd have dinner together while Eleanor ate alone in her room. And sometimes, Eleanor would hear them together in ways that made it abundantly clear this wasn't a professional relationship. Daniel didn't even bother hiding it anymore. He would make love to Sophia in the guest bedroom while Eleanor was in the master suite. He would kiss her in the hallway. He would say things to her that a husband should only say to his wife. And he did it all knowing that Eleanor couldn't see, that she was helpless, that there was nothing she could do about it. Psychological torture was intentional. Daniel wanted Eleanor broken. He wanted her to feel worthless and powerless, because a broken Eleanor was easier to control. A depressed Eleanor wouldn't ask questions about the business, wouldn't review financial statements, wouldn't notice that money was disappearing. So he systematically destroyed her emotionally while stealing from her financially. But what Daniel didn't understand was that Eleanor had something he'd never counted on. She had her father's mind. Richard Montgomery had taught her to think strategically, to see patterns, to question things that didn't add up. And even in her broken state, even blind and grieving and isolated, Eleanor's mind was still working. She started noticing things, inconsistencies, questions that didn't have good answers. Daniel told her that Montgomery Technologies was struggling financially, that the board was concerned about the company's direction, that they might need to sell assets to stay solvent. But Eleanor knew the company's fundamentals. She'd built the strategic plan herself. Montgomery Technologies was profitable, growing. There was no reason for financial struggle, so why was Daniel lying? Eleanor started asking to be included in business discussions. She asked Daniel to read her the quarterly financial reports. He would do it, but his summaries were vague, numbers that didn't quite add up, explanations that didn't make sense. When Eleanor pressed for details, Daniel would get frustrated. He'd tell her she needed to focus on her recovery and let him handle the business. He'd remind her that she was in no condition to make strategic decisions. He'd make her feel guilty for even asking, and for a while Eleanor backed off. But she didn't stop thinking. She didn't stop noticing the inconsistencies. One night, about 3 months after the accident, Eleanor was lying in bed unable to sleep. She heard Daniel and Sophia in the living room. They were speaking in low voices, but the house was quiet and sound carried. Eleanor got out of bed carefully. She'd learned to navigate the house in darkness. She made her way down the hallway slowly, using her hands on the wall to guide her. She stopped just outside the living room where she could hear them clearly. and what she heard made her blood run cold. Sophia was asking Daniel when they were going to finalize the offshore transfers. Daniel said they needed to wait another month. They needed the merger with Tech Global to go through first. Once that deal closed, he'd have access to $3 billion in liquid capital. They could drain the accounts, file for Eleanor's psychiatric commitment, and disappear. Sophia asked what would happen to Eleanor. Daniel laughed. He said once she was committed to a facility, she'd be diagnosed with severe depression and cognitive impairment. No one would believe anything she said. She'd spend the rest of her life in an institution while they lived in Monaco on her money. Eleanor stood in the hallway, her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Her husband had tried to kill her, and now he was planning to steal everything and have her locked away. She wanted to run, to scream, to call the police, but she couldn't, because she had no proof. Who would believe a blind woman over her successful husband? Who would take her word against Daniel's carefully constructed image? She needed evidence, real evidence, and to get it, she would have to do something incredibly difficult. She would have to keep pretending, keep playing the victim, keep letting Daniel think she was helpless while she figured out how to fight back. Eleanor returned to her bedroom that night and lay awake until morning. Her mind was racing. She replayed everything that had happened since the accident, the inconsistencies, the cruelty, the betrayal, and she realized something that would change everything. She realized that if Daniel thought she was blind and helpless, he would get careless. He would make mistakes. He would reveal things he shouldn't because he didn't think she could do anything about it. Eleanor could use his arrogance against him. She could use his assumption that she was broken against him, but she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. Someone she could trust completely. Someone who would believe her and help her build a case. Eleanor thought about who she could call. Most of her close friends had drifted away after the accident. Daniel had isolated her systematically, making excuses for why she couldn't take visitors, claiming she was too fragile, too depressed. People had stopped calling because they believed Daniel when he said Eleanor needed space. But there was one person who wouldn't be fooled by Daniel's act. Her father's former lawyer, Marcus Harrison. Marcus had worked with Richard Montgomery for 30 years. He'd helped structure the estate. He'd known Eleanor since she was a child, and he'd never liked Daniel. He'd warned Eleanor before the wedding that something felt off about her fiancé. Eleanor had dismissed his concerns as old-fashioned protectiveness. Now she wished she'd listened. The next morning, Eleanor waited until Daniel left for the office. Then she asked her nurse if she could make a private phone call. The nurse handed her a phone. Eleanor dialed Marcus Harrison's number from memory. When he answered, Eleanor said 3 words that would start everything. "Marcus, I need help." They met 2 days later at Marcus's office. Eleanor told her nurse she had a doctor's appointment. She took an Uber, something Daniel didn't know she was capable of arranging. And for the first time since the accident, Eleanor told someone the truth. She told Marcus everything. The accident, her suspicions about Daniel, the conversations she'd overheard, the offshore accounts, the planned commitment. Marcus listened without interrupting. When Eleanor finished, he asked her one question. "Do you think Daniel caused the accident?" Eleanor said yes, and Marcus believed her. He said they needed to be very careful. If Daniel was planning what Eleanor described, he was dangerous. They needed evidence before they could act, and gathering that evidence would require Eleanor to do something extraordinarily difficult. She would need to go back home, continue playing the blind, helpless wife, and record everything. Marcus had a contact at a private investigation firm that specialized in corporate fraud. Within 24 hours, they'd equipped Eleanor with audio recording devices hidden in her clothing. They were voice-activated and stored files in the cloud. Eleanor wouldn't need to see anything to operate them. She just needed to wear them. Marcus also hired a forensic accountant to start tracing Montgomery Technologies' financial transactions. If money was being embezzled, they would find it. But it would take time. Eleanor understood. She went home that day and continued her performance. Daniel came home from work, asked how her doctor's appointment went. Eleanor said it was fine. They were adjusting her medications. Daniel nodded, barely interested. Then Sophia arrived. And that night, Eleanor recorded everything. Every conversation, every comment, every moment of intimacy between her husband and his mistress. She recorded Daniel talking about the offshore accounts. She recorded Sophia discussing the forged documents. She recorded Daniel explaining his plan to have Eleanor committed. And every night, after they'd gone to sleep, Eleanor would upload the files to Marcus Harrison's secure server. For 2 months, Eleanor gathered evidence. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. She had to listen to her husband discuss her like she was an obstacle to remove. She had to hear Sophia laugh about how pathetic Eleanor was. She had to endure their cruelty and their arrogance while pretending to be oblivious. But she did it, because Eleanor understood something fundamental. Revenge wasn't about immediate satisfaction. It was about complete and total victory. By January of 2020, Eleanor and Marcus had everything they needed. Hours of recorded conversations, financial records showing $847 million in embezzled funds, evidence of forged documents, testimony from a mechanic who could prove Eleanor's brake lines had been deliberately cut. They had enough to destroy Daniel and Sophia completely. But Eleanor wanted more than just legal victory. She wanted to watch them fall. She wanted them to think they'd won right before she took everything away. So she and Marcus planned something audacious. They would let Daniel proceed with his final plan. They would let him think he was about to close the biggest deal of his life. And then, at the moment of his greatest triumph, Eleanor would reveal that she'd known everything all along. The Tech Global merger was scheduled to close on March 15, 2020. Daniel had negotiated a $5 billion acquisition of Montgomery Technologies. He would personally net $2.3 billion from the deal as interim CEO. It was exactly what he'd been working toward for 3 years. The board had approved the sale. The contracts were prepared. All that remained was the final signing. Daniel had told Eleanor about the deal, of course. He'd framed it as necessary to save the company. Eleanor had played along. She'd acted confused and sad but trusting. She'd signed the documents Daniel put in front of her. Documents she couldn't read because she was blind. Documents that she had no idea gave Daniel complete control. Except Eleanor wasn't signing anything. The signature Daniel thought was Eleanor's was actually forged by Sophia, and Eleanor had documentation proving it. The week before the signing, something happened that Daniel and Sophia never saw coming. Something that would change everything one final time. Eleanor's vision started to return. It began with light sensitivity. She was sitting in her bedroom one morning when she noticed a faint glow. She thought she was imagining it, but over the next few days the sensation got stronger. She could perceive shapes, movement. And then, 1 week before the scheduled signing, Eleanor woke up and she could see. Not perfectly. Her vision was blurry at first, but it was there. The doctors had said her blindness was permanent. They'd said the optic nerve damage was irreversible. But sometimes medicine is wrong. Sometimes the human body does things that seem impossible. Eleanor's optic nerves had regenerated, slowly, gradually, and now, 4 months after the accident, she had her sight back. Eleanor's first instinct was to scream with joy, to call her doctors, to tell everyone, but then she stopped. Because if Daniel knew she could see, everything would change. He would adjust his plans. He would be more careful. He might even run before they could prosecute him. Eleanor realized that her returned vision was the final piece of the puzzle. It was the advantage that would let her destroy Daniel completely. So she made a decision that still amazes people when they hear about it. She decided to keep pretending to be blind. For 1 week, Eleanor continued her performance. But now she could watch Daniel and Sophia directly. She could see their faces when they talked about her. She could see Sophia kissing her husband in the hallway. She could see Daniel going through her personal files in the study. She could see everything, and they had no idea. The recordings Eleanor made that week were the most damning of all, because now she could describe exactly what was happening visually. She could testify that she saw Daniel and Sophia together. She could describe the documents they were forging. She could provide details that a blind person would never know. Marcus Harrison was thrilled when Eleanor called to tell him about her vision. He said it was a gift, a chance to catch them in the act with testimony no defense attorney could refute. They finalized their plan. On March 15th, the day of the signing, Eleanor would let Daniel go to the office. She would let him think everything was proceeding as planned. And then, right before he signed the merger documents, Eleanor would walk into that boardroom, sighted, prepared, and ready to reclaim everything he'd tried to steal. March 15th, 2020 arrived. Daniel woke up early that morning. Eleanor pretended to be asleep. She watched through barely open eyes as he got dressed in his best suit. He looked excited, confident, like a man about to become a billionaire. He kissed Eleanor on the forehead before leaving, a perfunctory gesture. Then he was gone. Eleanor waited 10 minutes to make sure he wasn't coming back. Then she got up, removed the contact lenses she'd been wearing to make her eyes look unfocused, and got dressed. She put on a navy blue power suit, the kind she used to wear when she ran Montgomery Technologies. She did her makeup carefully. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. 4 months of pretending to be helpless had changed her, but today she was taking herself back. Eleanor called Marcus Harrison. She told him it was time. Marcus had everything prepared. He'd already contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division. He'd already assembled the evidence. He'd already arranged for federal agents to be present at the signing. All Eleanor had to do was walk into that boardroom and tell the truth. She got into her car. Her hands were shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. This was the first time she'd driven since the accident. The first time she'd gone anywhere without assistance. It felt surreal and terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Eleanor started the engine and drove toward Montgomery Technologies headquarters, toward the confrontation that would define the rest of her life. She arrived at the building at 1:45 p.m. The signing was scheduled for 2 o'clock. Eleanor walked through the lobby. Employees stared at her. Some gasped. Some pulled out their phones. Nobody had seen Eleanor Montgomery walking unassisted in 4 months. Nobody knew she could see. The whispers started immediately. Eleanor didn't care. She walked straight to the elevator, pressed the button for the executive floor, and rode up in silence. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped out into the hallway. Daniel's secretary was sitting at her desk. When she saw Eleanor, she actually screamed, "Eleanor, is that you? Can you see?" Eleanor smiled. "Yes, I can see, and I'm here for the board meeting." The secretary stammered something about getting Mr. Bradford. Eleanor said that won't be necessary. "I'll announce myself." She walked to the boardroom doors, took a deep breath, and pushed them open. The room fell completely silent. 12 board members sat around the conference table. Daniel was at the head, mid-sentence. Sophia was standing beside him with a presentation remote. Representatives from Tech Global were seated along one side. Everyone froze. Eleanor stood in the doorway, meeting Daniel's eyes directly, and she said the words she'd been waiting 4 months to say. "Hello, Daniel, I can see you." The silence in that boardroom lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Daniel's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, shock, and then something that looked like pure terror. He stood up so quickly his chair rolled backward. "Eleanor, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be home." Eleanor walked into the room with complete confidence. She looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member. "I'm here to stop a fraud. I'm here to reclaim my company. And I'm here to make sure my husband goes to prison for attempted murder." The room exploded. Board members started talking over each other. The Tech Global representatives looked bewildered. Sophia went pale and took a step backward. And Daniel, realizing his entire plan was collapsing, tried to regain control. He pointed at Eleanor and said she was clearly unstable, that she'd been diagnosed with severe depression and cognitive impairment, that she wasn't mentally fit to be there. He turned to the board. "This is exactly why we need to proceed with her commitment papers." "She's having a breakdown." Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She simply pulled a flash drive from her pocket and handed it to the board's chairman. "Everything you need is on here. 4 months of recorded conversations between my husband and his mistress. Evidence of $847 million in embezzled funds. Proof that my brake lines were deliberately cut. And documentation showing that every signature on the documents before you was forged." The chairman inserted the flash drive into his laptop, projected the screen onto the boardroom display, and hit play. For the next 15 minutes, everyone in that room watched and listened to Daniel Bradford's plan unfold in his own words. They heard him discuss cutting Eleanor's brake lines. They heard him laughing about her blindness. They heard him and Sophia planning to drain the company's accounts and disappear. They heard everything. When the last recording ended, nobody spoke. Daniel tried one more time to deny it. He said the recordings were fabricated, deepfakes created by Eleanor because she was angry about him taking over the company. But before he could finish, the boardroom doors opened again. FBI agents walked in, 6 of them led by a woman who introduced herself as Special Agent Rebecca Walsh. She looked directly at Daniel. "Daniel Bradford, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." Daniel's face crumbled. He looked at Eleanor with pure hatred. "You were never blind. You've been lying this whole time." Eleanor met his eyes without flinching. "I was blind, Daniel, blind to who you really were, blind to think you could ever love me. But my vision came back, and I've been watching you for a week, watching you celebrate stealing my life, watching you plan my destruction. Did you really think I would just let you win?" Sophia tried to run. She actually made it to the door before another agent blocked her path. "Sophia Chen, you're also under arrest as an accessory to fraud and embezzlement." Sophia started crying immediately. She pointed at Daniel. "This was all his idea. I just did what he told me to. He said we'd be rich. He said Eleanor would never know." Eleanor looked at Sophia with something close to pity. "You helped him try to kill me. You helped him steal from my company. You made love to my husband in my house while I sat there pretending to be blind. And now you want sympathy." Agent Walsh handcuffed them both. She read them their Miranda rights. And as she led them out of the boardroom, Daniel looked back at Eleanor one last time. "I loved you once, you know, before the money, before all of this." Eleanor's response was ice cold. "No, you didn't. You loved what I could give you, but you never loved me, and that's why you lost." The board members sat in stunned silence as the FBI agents escorted Daniel and Sophia out. Finally, the chairman turned to Eleanor. "What do you need from us?" Eleanor straightened her jacket. "I need you to void this merger. Daniel had no authority to sell this company. I need you to reinstate me as CEO effective immediately. And I need you to cooperate fully with the FBI's investigation." The chairman nodded slowly. Then he stood, and he said something that Eleanor would never forget. "Welcome back, Ms. Montgomery." One by one, the other board members stood and applauded. The Tech Global representatives quietly gathered their materials and left, and Eleanor stood at the head of the conference table, exactly where she belonged. The aftermath moved quickly. The FBI's investigation uncovered everything. They traced every dollar of the $847 million that Daniel and Sophia had embezzled. They found the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the forged documents. They interviewed the mechanic who'd examined Eleanor's SUV and confirmed the brake lines had been deliberately cut. They built an airtight case. Daniel and Sophia were denied bail. The prosecution argued they were flight risks with access to millions in stolen funds. They were held in federal detention while awaiting trial. During those months, Eleanor threw herself into rebuilding Montgomery Technologies. The company had suffered during Daniel's brief tenure. Stock prices had dropped. Key employees had left. Strategic initiatives had been abandoned. But Eleanor was determined to fix everything. She worked 18-hour days. She met with every department head personally. She restructured the executive team. She approved new product development. She negotiated partnerships. And slowly, Montgomery Technologies began to recover. The media had a field day with the story. Billionaire Heiress fakes blindness to catch husband who tried to murder her. It was a story made for headlines. Eleanor gave exactly one interview to a journalist she trusted. She wanted to control the narrative. She wanted people to understand what had happened. And she wanted other victims of financial abuse to know they weren't alone. The trial began in September of 2020. It lasted 6 months. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. The recordings, the financial records, the testimony from the mechanic. Eleanor herself took the stand for 3 days. She described the accident, the recovery, the moment she realized Daniel had tried to kill her, the decision to pretend to remain blind, the 4 months of gathering evidence. Her testimony was calm and detailed and absolutely devastating. Daniel's defense attorney tried to argue that Eleanor had fabricated the recordings, that she'd manipulated the evidence because she was angry about Daniel having an affair. But the forensic analysis proved the recordings were authentic. The metadata showed they'd been created in real time over several months. There was no manipulation, no editing, just Daniel's voice planning to destroy his wife. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Daniel Bradford guilty on all counts: attempted murder, embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to 45 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. Sophia Chen received a slightly lighter sentence, 20 years as an accessory. The judge acknowledged that while Sophia had participated in the crimes, Daniel had been the architect, but he also made it clear that Sophia's actions were despicable. She'd helped a man try to murder his wife for money. There was no excuse for that. Eleanor attended the sentencing hearing. She sat in the front row of the courtroom gallery and watched as the judge delivered the verdicts. When Daniel was led away in handcuffs, he looked at her one last time. His expression was a mixture of rage and something that might have been regret. Eleanor felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, just a sense of closure. This chapter of her life was over. A year after the sentencing, Eleanor did something unexpected. She visited Daniel in prison. The visit was arranged through her attorney. Daniel was initially suspicious. He thought Eleanor was coming to gloat. But when they sat down across from each other in the prison visiting room, Eleanor's demeanor was calm, almost sad. Daniel asked why she'd come. Eleanor said she'd been asking herself the same question, but she realized she needed to see him one more time, not to celebrate his imprisonment, but to understand how they'd gotten here. She asked Daniel if any of it had been real. Had he ever actually loved her, or had it all been a con from the beginning? Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he admitted the truth. He said that when he first approached Eleanor at that charity gala, it had absolutely been calculated. He'd researched her, planned the meeting, designed his entire persona to appeal to her. But over time, something unexpected had happened. He'd actually started to care about her. Not love, maybe, but something close to it. And that had made what he was planning even harder. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, she asked the question that had haunted her since the trial. Why didn't you just stop? If you cared about me at all, why did you go through with it? Daniel's answer was brutally honest. Because I wanted the money more than I wanted you. Because I'd spent my entire life watching rich people have everything while I had to work for scraps. Because I convinced myself I deserved it more than you did. You were born into wealth. I had to fight for everything. It wasn't fair. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. So you tried to kill me because you thought life wasn't fair? Daniel met her eyes. Yes. And I'd probably do it again if I had the chance. Because people like you don't understand what it's like to want something so badly you'd destroy anything to get it. Eleanor stood up. She'd heard enough. She told Daniel that she forgave him, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because holding on to anger was only hurting her. She said she hoped he'd use his time in prison to figure out why he'd become the kind of person who could rationalize murder. And then she left. She never visited him again, never spoke his name again. Daniel Bradford simply ceased to exist in her world. Sophia Chen tried to reach out to Eleanor several times from prison. She wrote letters apologizing, begging for forgiveness, claiming she'd been manipulated by Daniel. Eleanor never responded to a single letter. Because unlike Daniel, Sophia had never admitted the truth. She was still playing victim, still pretending she hadn't made her own choices, and Eleanor had no interest in absolving someone who wouldn't take responsibility. In the 3 years following Daniel's conviction, Eleanor Montgomery rebuilt everything. Montgomery Technologies not only recovered, it thrived. Under Eleanor's leadership, the company's market capitalization grew to $120 billion. They launched 3 groundbreaking products that revolutionized cloud computing security. They acquired 2 major competitors and expanded into artificial intelligence research. Revenue grew to $32 billion annually. Eleanor herself became one of the most prominent voices in the technology industry. She was featured on the cover of Time magazine. Forbes named her one of the most powerful women in business. She spoke at conferences around the world about leadership, resilience, and corporate governance. But Eleanor's most important work wasn't corporate. It was personal. She founded the Montgomery Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence and financial abuse. The foundation provided legal services, counseling, and financial education to people trapped in abusive relationships. Eleanor donated $200 million to fund it. She personally oversaw the programs. She met with survivors and heard their stories. And she used her own experience to help others understand that they weren't alone. That they could fight back, that they could survive. Eleanor also became an advocate for corporate fraud prevention. She worked with legislators to strengthen laws around spousal financial abuse. She pushed for better background checks for executives. She championed whistleblower protections. She testified before Congress about the need for transparency in corporate governance. Her advocacy led to several significant legal reforms. The Eleanor Montgomery Act, passed in 2022, created new federal penalties for intimate partner financial abuse. It also established protections for victims trying to recover stolen assets. The law was groundbreaking because it recognized financial abuse as a form of domestic violence. It gave victims tools to fight back legally and financially. Eleanor's personal life remained private. She didn't date, didn't remarry. When journalists asked about her romantic life, she gave the same answer every time. She said she'd loved once and it nearly destroyed her. She wasn't interested in repeating that experience. She had her work. She had her foundation. She had meaningful relationships with friends and colleagues. That was enough. But privately, Eleanor admitted to her therapist that the betrayal had changed something fundamental in her. She'd lost the ability to trust people completely. She analyzed every relationship, questioned every motive. She couldn't turn off the part of her brain that had learned to watch for deception. Her therapist suggested that maybe that wasn't entirely bad. Maybe the experience had taught Eleanor to trust her instincts, to protect herself, to value her own judgment over blind faith in others. Eleanor considered that perspective, and over time she came to accept it. She would never be the woman who fell in love naively again, but she was stronger, wiser, more capable of protecting herself and others. In 2023, Eleanor published a memoir titled Blind Trust: How I Survived Betrayal and Reclaimed My Life. The book became an instant bestseller. It topped the New York Times list for 18 weeks. It was translated into 37 languages. Movie studios bid for the film rights. Eleanor sold them for $20 million and donated the entire amount to domestic violence charities. She didn't write the book for money. She wrote it because she wanted people to understand what had happened. She wanted to demystify the experience of being betrayed by someone you love. She wanted readers to know that survival was possible, that you could be broken and still rebuild. The book's final chapter was particularly powerful. Eleanor wrote about the moment her vision returned. She described standing in her bedroom, seeing clearly for the first time in months. And she wrote that in that moment, she realized something profound. Physical blindness was temporary. But the blindness of trust, the blindness of refusing to see red flags, the blindness of loving someone more than you love yourself, that kind of blindness could last forever if you let it. Eleanor wrote that reclaiming her vision wasn't just about her eyesight. It was about seeing herself clearly, seeing her worth, seeing that she deserved better than what Daniel had given her. And once she could see that truth, everything else followed. The book resonated with millions of readers. Eleanor received thousands of letters from people who'd experienced similar betrayals, not always as dramatic as attempted murder, but betrayals nonetheless. Spouses who'd stolen from joint accounts. Partners who'd manipulated and isolated. Family members who'd exploited trust for financial gain. Each letter reminded Eleanor why she'd written the book, why she'd chosen to share her story publicly despite the pain and embarrassment, because silence protected abusers, and speaking up gave victims permission to do the same. By 2024, Eleanor had transformed from a victim of one of the most shocking crimes in recent memory into a symbol of resilience and justice. But she never forgot the cost. She never romanticized what had happened to her. She was clear in every interview that she would have preferred none of it happened, that she would have chosen a boring, happy marriage over the fame and respect that came from surviving betrayal. In the fall of 2024, Eleanor was invited to speak at a conference on domestic violence prevention. The audience was mostly survivors and advocates. Eleanor stood at the podium and looked out at hundreds of faces, and she told them something she'd never said publicly before. She told them that there were still nights when she woke up angry, nights when she replayed everything and wondered how she'd missed the signs, nights when she felt stupid for trusting Daniel, for believing his lies, for giving him access to her life and her company. She told them that healing wasn't linear, that 5 years later she still had moments of rage and grief, that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and that it was okay to be angry. It was okay to want justice. It was okay to refuse to let go of the pain if it protected you from future harm. The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted several minutes, because what Eleanor had done was given them permission to be human, to be messy, to be angry, to reject the narrative that victims need to forgive and move on in order to heal. Sometimes, Eleanor said, moving on means carrying the anger with you, letting it fuel your fight, letting it remind you never to be that vulnerable again. Eleanor's net worth in 2025 was estimated at $11.4 billion. She'd more than doubled her wealth since Daniel's arrest, but money had never been the point for Eleanor. The point was proving that he hadn't broken her, that she could not only survive but thrive, that women who'd been victimized didn't have to stay victims, They could become warriors. One afternoon in early 2025, Eleanor was working in her office at Montgomery Technologies when her assistant told her someone was asking to see her. A woman who said it was urgent. Eleanor normally didn't take unscheduled meetings, but something made her agree. The woman who entered her office was in her early 30s, nervous, scared. She introduced herself as Jennifer and said she'd read Eleanor's book. She was in a situation similar to what Eleanor had described. Her husband was financially abusive. He'd isolated her from her family. He controlled all their money, and Jennifer suspected he was planning something worse. She didn't know who else to turn to, so she'd come to Eleanor. Eleanor listened to Jennifer's story, heard the familiar patterns, the manipulation, the control, the slow erosion of autonomy, and she made a decision. She picked up her phone and called Marcus Harrison. Within an hour, Jennifer had a team of lawyers working on her case. Eleanor personally covered the legal fees. And over the next 6 months, they helped Jennifer escape her marriage, recover her stolen assets, and rebuild her life. Jennifer was the first, but she wasn't the last. Eleanor quietly began funding legal support for dozens of women in similar situations. She created a network of attorneys, investigators, and therapists who specialized in financial abuse cases. She didn't publicize any of it. This wasn't about her image. It was about actually helping people. But word spread. Women started reaching out. The Montgomery Foundation's helpline received thousands of calls. And Eleanor made sure every single person got the help they needed, because she understood something that most people didn't. Wealth could be a weapon, but it could also be a shield, and she was determined to use hers to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. In 2026, Eleanor received a letter that surprised her. It was from Daniel Bradford. He'd been in prison for 6 years. The letter was different from anything he'd written before. There was no manipulation. No attempt to justify what he'd done, just a simple acknowledgement. He wrote that he'd spent 6 years thinking about who he'd become, about the choices he'd made, and he wanted Eleanor to know that he finally understood. He destroyed the only real thing he'd ever had, because Eleanor had actually cared about him, and he'd repaid that care with cruelty and violence. The letter ended with 2 sentences. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I finally see what I did. And I'm sorry. Eleanor read the letter twice. Then she put it in a drawer and never responded, because some apologies come too late. Some damage can't be repaired with words, and Eleanor had moved on. Daniel Bradford was a chapter in her past, a painful one, an instructive one, but still just a chapter. Her life was so much bigger now. That same year, Eleanor was approached by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell her story. Eleanor was reluctant at first. But the filmmaker convinced her that the documentary could reach people who wouldn't read a book, that it could educate a younger generation about the warning signs of financial abuse, that it could save lives. So Eleanor agreed. The documentary premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January 2027. It was titled Blind Trust, after Eleanor's memoir. The film featured interviews with Eleanor, the FBI agents who'd worked her case, board members from Montgomery Technologies, and several women Eleanor had helped through her foundation. It also included some of the actual audio recordings that Eleanor had made. Hearing Daniel's voice plotting her murder sent chills through the audience. The documentary won the Grand Jury Prize. It was later picked up by Netflix and streamed to millions of viewers worldwide. The impact was immediate. Domestic violence hotlines reported a spike in calls. Women came forward about financial abuse they'd been hiding. Law enforcement agencies started training officers to recognize the signs. Eleanor's story became a catalyst for a larger conversation about economic coercion in relationships. 7 years after the accident that nearly killed her, Eleanor Montgomery sat down for a comprehensive interview with a journalist from The New Yorker. The resulting profile was titled, The Woman Who Refused to Stay Blind. In the interview, Eleanor reflected on everything that had happened. She talked about the moment she realized Daniel had tried to kill her, the decision to pretend to remain blind even after her vision returned, the months of gathering evidence while enduring psychological torture, and she addressed the question that everyone wanted to know, was it worth it? Eleanor's answer was measured. She said that nothing about what happened to her was worth it. She would have preferred to never be betrayed, never be assaulted, never have to fight for what was rightfully hers. But given that it did happen, she was grateful she'd had the resources and the strength to fight back. She was grateful she'd survived. And she was grateful she could use her experience to help others. The interviewer asked if Eleanor regretted marrying Daniel. Eleanor thought about the question for a long time. Then she said something that surprised people. She said she didn't regret the marriage itself, because at the time she'd believed it was real. She'd believed Daniel loved her, and that belief had been genuine on her part. What she regretted was ignoring the red flags, the small inconsistencies. The moments when her instincts told her something was off, but she dismissed them. She regretted not trusting herself more than she trusted him. The interviewer asked what red flags Eleanor had missed. Eleanor listed them methodically. Daniel's interest in her wealth had always been slightly too keen. He'd asked detailed questions about her assets early in their relationship. Questions that seemed innocent, but in retrospect were clearly reconnaissance. He'd isolated her subtly from her friends and advisors. He'd always had a reason why she shouldn't see certain people or attend certain events. He'd positioned himself as her protector while actually cutting off her support system. He'd been too perfect, too accommodating, too willing to give up his own career to join hers. Eleanor said that in hindsight, she should have questioned why a successful attorney would be so eager to abandon his profession. She should have wondered if his motives were purely romantic or if there was something else driving his interest. But she'd been lonely, grieving her father, desperate for connection. And she'd let those vulnerabilities cloud her judgment. The interviewer asked if Eleanor blamed herself for what happened. Eleanor was firm in her response. No, she didn't blame herself. Daniel was responsible for his actions. He'd made the choice to deceive her, to marry her under false pretenses, to try to kill her. Those were his choices. Eleanor's only mistake was trusting someone who didn't deserve trust, and that wasn't a moral failing. It was human nature. But Eleanor also acknowledged that the experience had fundamentally changed how she approached relationships. She was more guarded now, more skeptical. She analyzed people's motivations constantly. She looked for inconsistencies. She trusted slowly and verified everything. Some people might see that as tragic, a loss of innocence, but Eleanor saw it as wisdom. She'd learned that trust should be earned, not given freely. That love should be built on truth, not illusion. And that protecting yourself wasn't cynicism. It was survival. The interviewer asked about Eleanor's decision to help other victims through her foundation. Eleanor explained that she'd had advantages most victims don't have. Wealth, legal resources, a platform. She'd been able to fight back in ways that most people in abusive relationships couldn't, so she felt a responsibility to use those advantages to help others, to level the playing field, to give victims the tools they needed to escape and rebuild. She said that every woman she helped reminded her why she'd survived. It wasn't just luck. It wasn't just stubbornness. It was because she was meant to do this work, to be a voice for people who'd been silenced, to prove that abusers don't always win. The article also explored the broader implications of Eleanor's case. Legal experts discussed how her experience had changed laws around financial abuse. Prosecutors explained that the evidence Eleanor gathered had set a new standard for domestic violence cases involving economic coercion. Her recordings, her documentation, her methodical approach to building a case, all of it had become a template for other victims trying to prove abuse. Psychologists analyzed the trauma of what Eleanor had endured. They explained that the psychological impact of being betrayed by a spouse was often more damaging than physical violence. The breach of trust, the violation of intimacy, the realization that someone you loved was capable of such cruelty. Those wounds took years to heal, and for some people, they never fully healed. Eleanor admitted in the interview that she still had nightmares sometimes. Dreams where she was back in that house, blind and helpless, listening to Daniel and Sophia. Dreams where the accident happened again, but this time she didn't survive. She said trauma doesn't just disappear because you get justice. It stays with you, changes you, and you have to learn to live with it. But Eleanor also talked about the unexpected gifts that came from surviving. She said she discovered a strength she didn't know she had, a resilience that had been forged in the worst possible circumstances. She'd learned that she could endure almost anything, that she could be broken and still rebuild, that she could lose everything and still find reasons to keep going. She'd also discovered the importance of purpose. Before the betrayal, Eleanor's purpose had been running Montgomery Technologies. Building her father's legacy, making money. Those things were still important, But now she had a deeper purpose, helping others, using her pain to prevent someone else's. That purpose gave her life meaning in a way that wealth never had. The New Yorker profile concluded with Eleanor's thoughts on forgiveness. The interviewer asked if she'd forgiven Daniel. Eleanor's answer was nuanced. She said she'd let go of the acute anger, the rage that had consumed her in the immediate aftermath. But forgiveness implied that what Daniel did was somehow forgivable. And Eleanor didn't believe it was. He'd tried to murder her. He'd stolen from her. He'd psychologically tortured her. Those actions didn't deserve forgiveness. What Eleanor had done instead was accept what happened. She'd integrated the experience into her life story. She'd stopped letting it define her. She'd moved forward. And that, she said, was more important than forgiveness. In the spring of 2027, 8 years after the accident, Eleanor Montgomery made a decision that surprised everyone who knew her. She announced that she was stepping down as CEO of Montgomery Technologies, not because she was struggling, not because she couldn't handle the job, but because she wanted to focus entirely on her foundation work. She'd spent 20 years building Montgomery Technologies. She'd carried on her father's legacy. She'd proven herself as a leader. And now she wanted to do something different, something that felt more meaningful at this stage of her life. The board tried to convince her to stay. They offered her more money, more control, anything she wanted. But Eleanor was firm. She'd already chosen her successor, a brilliant woman who'd been heading the company's innovation division, someone Eleanor had mentored personally, someone she trusted completely to carry Montgomery Technologies forward. Eleanor's last day as CEO was emotional. Employees lined the hallways to say goodbye. She'd been with the company her entire adult life. She'd saved it from Daniel's attempted theft. She'd grown it into one of the most valuable technology companies in the world, and now she was walking away from it all. At the farewell reception, Eleanor gave a short speech. She thanked the employees for their dedication. She expressed confidence in the company's future, and she said something that became legendary within Montgomery Technologies. She said that building a company was important, but building a life that mattered was more important, and she'd finally figured out what that meant for her. Eleanor's foundation work expanded dramatically after she left Montgomery Technologies. She opened offices in 12 cities across the United States. She partnered with international organizations to help victims of financial abuse in other countries. She funded research into the economic impacts of domestic violence. She trained lawyers and social workers and law enforcement officers. She became one of the most effective advocates for victims' rights in the country. But Eleanor also did something unexpected. She started speaking publicly about her own ongoing healing process. She was honest about her struggles, the difficulty of trusting people, the hypervigilance, the moments when she still felt angry about what Daniel had done. She refused to present herself as someone who'd completely overcome her trauma, because that wasn't reality. Trauma doesn't work that way. Instead, she showed people that you could be both wounded and functional, both scarred and strong. You could carry pain and still build a meaningful life. That authenticity made her even more powerful as an advocate, because people saw that she understood. She wasn't speaking from theory. She was speaking from experience. In 2028, Eleanor was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her advocacy work. The ceremony was held at the White House. The citation praised her courage in surviving a brutal attack and her dedication to helping other victims. When the president placed the medal around her neck, Eleanor thought about her father, about how proud he would have been, not just of the award, but of the woman she'd become. That same year, Eleanor received news that Daniel Bradford had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. He had perhaps 6 months to live. The prison contacted her to ask if she wanted to visit him. Eleanor initially said no. She'd already said goodbye to Daniel years ago. She'd moved on. What would be the point of seeing him now? But after thinking about it for several days, Eleanor changed her mind. She realized she had one final question for Daniel, and she wanted the answer before he died. So she arranged a visit. She flew to the federal prison where Daniel was being held. She went through security, and she sat across from him in the visiting room one last time. Daniel looked terrible. The cancer had ravaged him. He was thin and pale and weak, but his eyes still had that spark of intelligence, that charm that had fooled Eleanor so completely 8 years ago. Eleanor asked her question without preamble. Did you ever, even for one moment, actually love me? Daniel looked at her for a long time, then he answered honestly. He said there were moments, brief moments when he'd forgotten the plan, forgotten that he was supposed to be conning her, moments when he'd looked at her and felt something real, but those moments never lasted because he'd always remind himself why he was there, what he stood to gain. And the money was always more important than the feeling. Eleanor nodded. She'd suspected that would be his answer, but she'd needed to hear it. She stood to leave. Daniel stopped her. He said he wanted her to know something. That of all the things he regretted, and there were many, his biggest regret was that he'd never let himself actually love her, because she would have been worth loving, if he'd been capable of it. Eleanor looked at him one last time, and she said something that brought their story full circle. She said that he was right. She would have been worth loving, but he'd never been worthy of being loved by her. And that was his tragedy, not hers. She walked out of the prison and never looked back. Daniel Bradford died 3 months later. Eleanor didn't attend his funeral. She didn't send flowers. She simply acknowledged his death the same way she'd acknowledged him for the past 8 years. As a chapter that was closed, as a lesson learned, as a reminder of her own strength. By 2029, a decade after the accident, Eleanor had helped more than 5,000 women escape financially abusive relationships. Her foundation had recovered over $2 billion in stolen assets. They'd successfully prosecuted hundreds of abusers. They'd changed laws in 37 states. The work continued, because financial abuse continued. Because there would always be people like Daniel who saw relationships as opportunities for exploitation. And there would always be people like Eleanor who fought back. Eleanor herself had found a kind of peace. Not the naive peace of someone who'd never been hurt, but the hard-won peace of someone who'd survived and built something meaningful from the wreckage. She had close friends, a fulfilling career, a sense of purpose that got her out of bed every morning. She still didn't date. Still didn't pursue romantic relationships. And she'd made peace with that too. She didn't need a partner to feel complete. She had herself. And after everything she'd been through, that was enough. On the 10-year anniversary of the accident, Eleanor drove up to Devil's Bend, the spot where Daniel had tried to kill her. Where her Mercedes had left the road and tumbled down the embankment. She stood at the edge and looked down at the ravine, and she thought about the woman who'd been in that car, the woman who'd trusted too easily, who'd believed in fairy tale endings, who'd thought love was enough. That woman had died in the crash, but someone stronger had emerged. Someone who understood that survival wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about how you put yourself back together after you shattered. Eleanor spent an hour there. Thinking, remembering, processing. And then she got back in her car and drove home, because that place didn't have power over her anymore. It was just a curve in the road, just a piece of her history, not her entire story. The story of Eleanor Montgomery isn't a happy one. It's not a tale of perfect justice or complete healing. It's messier than that. More complicated, more real. It's the story of a woman who was betrayed in the worst possible way. Who lost her sight and her trust and almost her life. Who discovered that the man she loved had tried to murder her for money. Who endured months of psychological torture while gathering evidence. Who watched her husband make love to another woman while pretending to be blind. And who ultimately destroyed the people who tried to destroy her. But it's also the story of resilience. Of refusing to stay a victim, of turning trauma into purpose, of using wealth and privilege to help people who have neither, of proving that you can be broken and still rebuild, that you can carry pain and still create meaning, that survival is possible even when it seems impossible. Eleanor Montgomery's story raises uncomfortable questions, questions about trust, about how well we really know the people we love, about the masks people wear and the secrets they keep, about the vulnerability of intimacy and the danger of giving someone complete access to your life. These aren't easy questions. They don't have simple answers, but they're questions worth asking. Because Eleanor's experience, while extreme, touches on something universal. The fear that the person you trust most might be hiding something, might be using you, might not be who they claim to be. Most people won't face attempted murder. Most won't discover their spouse embezzled hundreds of millions of dollars. But many will experience smaller betrayals, financial deception, emotional manipulation, the slow erosion of trust. And Eleanor's story offers a roadmap, not a perfect one, but a map nonetheless. It shows that you can survive betrayal, that you can fight back, that you don't have to accept abuse just because it comes from someone you love. The question that haunted Eleanor for years was one she finally answered in her last interview. Was it worth it? Not the betrayal itself. That was never worth it, But the fight, the survival, the rebuilding, was that worth the cost? Eleanor's answer was yes. Because the alternative was letting Daniel win. The alternative was staying broken. The alternative was accepting that she was a victim and always would be. And Eleanor refused to accept that. So she fought. She endured. She survived. And she built a life that mattered. A life that helped thousands of other people survive their own betrayals. That, Eleanor said, made everything worth it. Not because what happened to her was good, but because she'd transformed something evil into something meaningful. She'd taken her pain and weaponized it against the people who caused it. She'd turned her trauma into a tool that helped others. And in doing so, she'd reclaimed not just her company or her money, but her sense of self, her agency, her power. Today, Eleanor Montgomery is 50 years old. She runs one of the most effective victim advocacy organizations in the country. She speaks around the world about financial abuse and domestic violence. She's changed laws. She's saved lives. She's proven that survival is not only possible but can lead to something greater. She still carries the scars, the physical ones from the accident, the emotional ones from the betrayal, the psychological ones from months of pretending to be blind while watching her husband destroy her. Those scars will never fully fade, but they don't define her anymore. They're part of her story, but they're not the whole story. The whole story is about a woman who refused to stay in the darkness, who found her vision even when the doctors said it was impossible, who watched her enemies plot her destruction and then destroyed them instead, who took the worst thing that ever happened to her and turned it into her greatest strength. That's the story of Eleanor Montgomery. Not a fairy tale, not a simple narrative of good versus evil, but a complex, painful, inspiring story of what it means to survive, to fight, to refuse to let the people who hurt you have the final word. And as Eleanor herself says when she speaks to other survivors, your story isn't over just because someone tried to end it. You get to write the next chapter. You get to decide how it ends. Daniel Bradford tried to write Eleanor's ending. He tried to make it end with her death or her permanent imprisonment in blindness and helplessness. But Eleanor took the pen back. She wrote her own ending. And it was so much better than anything he could have imagined, because it wasn't an ending at all. It was the beginning. This has been the true story of Eleanor Montgomery, a story of betrayal, survival, and justice, a story that reminds us that the people we trust most can sometimes be the most dangerous, that blindness isn't always physical, and that seeing the truth, even when it destroys everything you believed, is always better than living in comfortable lies. Eleanor's story is still unfolding. She continues her work, continues helping victims, continues proving every single day that she's more than what Daniel tried to make her, more than a victim, more than a survivor. She's a force. And remember, what happened to Eleanor Montgomery was extreme, but the patterns of abuse she experienced are not uncommon. Isolation, financial control, manipulation. These happen in relationships every day. If you see these patterns in your own life, trust your instincts, document everything, and reach out for help before it escalates, because Eleanor survived, and you can too. Thank you for watching this story. If it impacted you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below telling us what you think about Eleanor's decision to pretend to remain blind. Would you have done the same thing? And subscribe to our channel for more true stories of survival, justice, and human resilience. Until next time, remember that your story isn't over until you say it is. And the people who try to destroy you don't get to write your ending. You do.